Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to GovComms, the podcast that examines the practice of content communication in government and the public sector. My name's David Pembroke, and thank you for joining me. Today, we speak to a pro in the world of government and private sector communications. Her name is Tanya BOWES, and at the moment, at this time in her career, she is the Director of Corporate Affairs at the CSIRO, which is the Australian National Scientific Organisation. Tanya is a communications and brand professional with over 20 years experience, and she has skills relating to communications, brand strategy, public relations, issues management, stakeholder communications, and indeed in her current role, a lot of government relations and understanding how to represent the interests of CSIRO, not only inside government but outside of government. She's led many organisations in both the public and private sectors. Currently, as I said, managing corporate affairs at the CSIRO, but she was also the General Manager of Communications at Destination New South Wales and has held positions and senior marketing and communications positions across Asia Pacific, the United Kingdom and in Europe, and working both client and agency side. So a real skilled professional. She joins me on the line now from Sydney. Tanya, thanks very much for joining me on GovComms.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks for the invitation and the kind introduction. I feel very, very old, actually.
Well, not as old as I am, so there you go. But listen, I think what I'd be interested in just starting on is really that change from private to the public sector. I know at Destination New South Wales I think it might have been your first job in government. Can you think back that far and perhaps explain what you saw as the differences coming from one to the other and how you were able to adapt?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a very interesting role at Destination New South Wales. So I was General Manager for Communications, and at that time, the role took into account publicity, government engagement, ministerial, mostly ministerial liaison, and also editorial and content. Destination New South Wales is a government agency, and its aim is to attract visitors to the state. So its goal was very clear, actually, doubling overnight expenditure by 2020. The shift for me, I was expecting it to be really quite significant. I think we all have, views on how another industry or another organisation might operate, and I was kind of right in some ways and wrong in others. I think, for Destination New South Wales, they had a very, very clear goal. And I think when you have a clear goal, whether you're in private or public sector, it enables you to focus your activities with quite a kind of laser sharp focus. I think what I was expecting was, I thought the pace would be slower. And this is just informed by my own perceptions. I thought, well, it'd probably be a bit slower. It'll probably be quite hard to get things done. And actually, I was proved completely the opposite. It was a very dynamic and fast-paced environment. And I think that was because, particularly at Destination New South Wales, it was informed by decisions and by the environment from an external consumer. So the visitor, whether they're business or a holiday maker that's got a choice of millions of destinations to choose from and millions of places to go and spend their money. And so it was an organisation that was very much informed by data, by what the media were telling us, by what consumers were telling us. We have obviously had a lot of visitor data to tell us whether our plans and campaigns were working. So I found that was actually very fast-paced. From the relationship, that was probably the first time that I worked directly in terms of government relations with ministerial department. And we had changes of ministers from a state level. I think I was there I think I had maybe 3 or 4 changes in ministers and ministerial staff during that time. And that that was very different. In a private enterprise, you have a broad definition of your external stakeholders and internal stakeholders, but they stay pretty steady. So your executive team and your major stakeholders often stay steady. At that first government role, there was change, which means that there are slight different ways that people like to interact, information, the way they like information presented. But I think I always took the approach that forewarned is forearmed. That's certainly something that I'm very clear on in managing relationships with government, and also just I think it gave me the opportunity to bring a private sector view of managing content, stories and opportunities to bring a broader perspective into the ministerial engagement, take us out from things that might be kind of obvious ministerial opportunities and look at things that may have previously been thought of as just pure PR opportunities and try and find a way to make them come together in a more kind of accessible way.
So that advice around, forewarned is forearmed. What advice would you have for people who are dealing with a change in ministerial office, as is happening now in some cases here? Just for our listeners from overseas, Australia has just had a general election. There has been a retention of the government. They stay on, but obviously new government means new ministers. And so people not only in Australia, but I know around the world are dealing with this. So what advice do you have to people as to how to effectively manage that transition from one political leader to the next?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I try and take it to the point of, how do we form basic relationships with anyone? And it's formed on, trust, which is built from being, reliable and available, and to be able to build, I think, a face-to-face relationship and a personal relationship as quickly as you can. So I think whenever if there's a change in ministerial office staff or your relationships in with departments, is to kind of quickly reach out, recognise that those offices, if they are going through change, they've got a lot to deal with. So being respectful of the fact that you might not be the most important call that they need to take that day, and being accepting of that and respectful of the time, and making sure that when you do get that first opportunity to interact with a new stakeholder, whether that's ministerial staff, department or otherwise, recognising that time is a very valuable commodity. Those people are pressed. They've got a lot of things to get through. They've normally got very big, very complex portfolios. Is being very clear on what are the key issues I need to let you know about? What are the things that are, giving confidence that they're well managed, that you're under control. So making sure that even if you're not the point person running on a particular issue, that you're very familiar with it so that you can talk with confidence, and using the time wisely. And then I think, for me, it's always making sure that, not every call is a call of, a crisis or a news opportunity, that sometimes you're just checking in and looking at the relationship, trying to shape it in a really early stage to be about listening and receiving information as much as imparting information. I think a lot of the time with stakeholder management, we're trying to get our information across so quickly that we sometimes forget to ask what's on their mind and what you can help them with.
That's an interesting question, because I was about to ask you, what is it that you think is the most common issue that is on a ministerial staffer's mind?
Oh, gosh. Look, I think it's, that no surprises piece is probably where I would go to. I'm not a minister, I'm not a staffer, but if I was in that position, and where I always come to with that first kind of information part is, what are the things that is keeping the agency or that person up at night, and making sure that there's transparency. So it would be, making sure I know where all the issues are, that I know that there's a plan in place for them to be managed, that I'm aware of where the sensitivities are, but also, the opportunities, because the staffers are supporting someone who wants to make a difference and wants to make an impact, and often the departments and the agencies are the way to provide them with information and evidence that enables them to forward that. So I think it's being really clear where the sensitivities are and providing that information, and then being equally paying as much attention to where the opportunities are, and not just focusing on the conversation and all the things that might be worrying them, but where the opportunities are too.
And this issue of time, I think, is really relevant as well, isn't it? Because as you say, they're very busy, enormous workloads, lots to do. They're in a hurry because often their political master is in a hurry because they want to get things done. There's only a certain amount of time before there's the next election. So they're in a hurry. So in terms of presenting that information, do you find that presenting information visually is a good way to go about it? Or what's the best way that you've found to be able to get people across the brief as quickly as possible?
I think visual presentation is good as long as you're not leading someone through a laborious slide pack. And I mean that in the nicest possible and respectful way to communicators, because we are great at putting together information that will lead people through a story, but sometimes you'll be with an audience, a person, an end user who just wants to get to the punchline.
Yeah.
So it's about kind of reading when that's appropriate, and sometimes I think it's just good to ask. I've got an information pack. Is it useful for us to go through that, or do you just want me to talk to the kind of top 5 things? And normally you'll find that, I certainly find anyway, that people then kind of relax and think, oh, good, okay. Yeah, why don't we start with the 5, and then I'll go back to number 3. Number 3 seems like it's a really good opportunity. Let's talk more about number 3.
Yeah. I think that's just fantastic advice for anyone, is to be curious. And before you start talking, and if you do start talking, start by asking questions. Start by really digging in to try to find where those issues are and how you can create the most value and most impact, and then just let everything else slide to one side. Because I imagine, and as we move now into discussing, the CSIRO, Australia's national science organisation, that, there's no lack of information there to present to the minister. It's about understanding what it is that they want to know about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I was really staggered when I came into the CSIRO. Not staggered by the sheer volume that they cover, but by the impact and where to start. And I think you and I have had discussions, David, that CSIRO's content is like drinking from a fire hose. And so finding that starting point is really critical, because it just you run the risk of really great information ending up like wallpaper and just background noise. So I think for me, I've always been fortunate that I've worked with organisations where they've been led by a clear purpose, and if they haven't had one, then we've helped create one. And for the CSIRO, we've really tried to return to our purpose, which is embodied in our Act of Parliament, which we were created in 1949, the CSIRO Act, which is really in a shortened form is solving the greatest challenges through science and technology. And so we've used that as a real anchor point for, kind of the litmus test on, is what we're about to communicate really answering why we've been created and what we're put here to do. And if it doesn't, then we either find a way that we can, get to the heart of it, or it doesn't kind of make the cut through the messaging framework. So for me, it's been about start with our purpose, and then be very clear in terms of, the lines of inquiry and evidence as a science organisation that will support that and help demonstrate. And I think the other challenge has been in a large organisation like the CSIRO that's been around for more than 100 years, is how do you make an organisation like that relevant and accessible and appealing? Because it's only through hitting those 3 markers, being relevant, accessible and appealing, that you can hope to build trust and awareness and understanding and all those good things that in a private company sells products, in a consumer goods company sells products and services, but in a government organisation really demonstrates to the taxpayer where their spend is going and whether it's being put to good use.
With that, what is the single biggest challenge that you're facing at the moment to deliver on that promise of solving the greatest challenges through science and technology, and to accomplish it by being relevant, accessible and appealing? What's your biggest problem?
Look, it's probably a saturation of message, which I think we're all facing. Actually, you're facing that whether you're working in government or in a private sector company. We're at this point where we are spending about 800 hours on our mobile internet in a year. We're spending about almost 500 minutes on your media, consuming media, and it's growing. And at home, the hours that we spend online have grown significantly. So I think there's a recent Roy Morgan poll that said, we're spending nearly 14.9 billion hours at home online compared to 7 billion everywhere else, so work and school and wherever else you might be. So trying to get a message as significant as we're solving, the greatest challenges is actually quite hard. It is really hard. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is how do you cut through all of the noise and everything grabbing attention, and we call it now the attention economy. That's the share that we're trying to get, is people's attention. How do you do that in such a cluttered landscape?
And how are you doing that?
Through being really razor sharp in the stories, in the content that we're developing. So again, we start with a purpose. Everything's anchored in the purpose. Does the story demonstrate that we are solving the greatest challenges through science and technology? And when I say story, I'm just using that as a loose kind of reference point, because it can be your conversation with a minister's office or with the department or with your fellow agency colleagues. It could be with a journalist. It could be with a member of the public, because my team also manages our inquiries line with the general public. So we start with that piece, which is ground everything in the purpose. And then, make sure that we're, presenting the information in a way that demonstrates the impact. So we had an example last year where we partnered with an organisation called Horticulture to solve one of the challenges, which is food waste. So the amount of food that we throw away. And this imperfect vegetables. There's only so many imperfect vegetables we can buy from our supermarkets. They all look really cute with their new labelling, but there's only so many we can buy. And so we partnered with an organisation to look at how we could be more creative with food waste. And one of the first pilot projects that the team had in one of our areas of science was that they were taking broccoli and they were turning it into powder. And this broccoli could get 1 tablespoon of this powder of broccoli would be the equivalent of a head of broccoli. So it solved a great food waste problem, but it also addressed one of our other challenges around health and well-being. The team looked at that and they created they had a very creative slant on it, which was to turn that into a story about broccoli lattes. So I overheard someone yesterday say, oh, well, that really appealed to the latte sipping mob. We do have a culture where we find that curious. We're obsessed with coffee, and there was the turmeric coffees last year. So, the communications team had a creative way of saying, look, we think we can get traction with, actually, instead of starting from the food waste angle, we'll come at it with a really creative angle. They served up broccoli lattes, and we had lots of, funny TV people are really enjoying the way that broccoli latte tasted. And in fact, we took it to our parliamentary showcase at Parliament House in October, and Senator Carr tried the broccoli latte too. And I don't think it was too appealing to any of them. But that's kind of beside the point. It was a creative way to get cut through, to tell a story, but importantly, to not leave it there as, here's this funny thing that the CSIRO's invented, but to take it back to some of our greatest challenges is around food waste and the health and well-being of our people. And these are two ways that we are helping solve some of those challenges. So it's really about that creativity, but making sure it's grounded in something that's real.
Interesting, though, you raised that question or the opportunity of partnering, and it's something that I'm very interested in at the moment, this notion of who can we work with, who's got our audience, who can contribute, who can we collaborate with? Because I think often as government we think we have to go it alone because we have to stand apart. But I think there's, so much more opportunity if we can just lift our chins a little bit and look around to see who else we can work with. And I imagine an organisation like the CSIRO, there'd be a real appetite for other companies if the CSIRO were to approach them, because there is such prestige in that you could really bring together some really great and powerful collaborations.
I think, collaboration, I think, is such an important. It's so important for us as the CSIRO, but also I think as communications professionals, is that I think sometimes we feel like we've got to solve things on our own, and actually, if there's nothing else that I've learned over the last 20 odd years, we'll leave the odd as question mark. 20 odd years is that you don't have to solve everything yourself. There's often fantastic ideas that you would never have come across without collaborating. And the CSIRO science is absolutely delivered with collaboration. I think people often don't realise that the I in CSIRO is industry. And so that's the way that we take science from benchtop, from a brilliant idea, into something that actually can be in people's hands. That's how the Relenza flu vaccine came about, the total wellbeing diet, the vaccine for Hendra virus. All of those things needed partnership with industry. They had to have collaboration. And I think as communications professionals, we need to embrace the media landscape, our colleagues in other departments, in other industries, in private sector, to look at how you could partner on like-minded issues to get a better impact. And it's a better impact for you, for the partner, but also for the consumer, because they get a much more rounded representation of what the impact of, in our case, science, can actually have in their everyday lives.
So as a leader of your team, how do you encourage your team to get out from behind their desks and to go and have those conversations, whether it's inside the branch that they're working in, whether it's inside the department, whether it's outside the department, whether it's with industry? How do you encourage them and give them the room and the space and the confidence that they have permission to seek out these collaborations?
I think it's about, I think actually in this day and age, you do need to be explicit to say you're welcome to, and in fact encouraged to go and have those conversations. I think the conversations with industry happen, and certainly the university sector happen naturally within CSIRO because we're collaborating on the science, and so often there's a natural pass through to the communications person to continue the relationship. I think with and at the department level, often our government is a major customer of the CSIRO products, so that happens naturally. But where it doesn't, we talk a lot about just being really clear on where the stakeholders are. It goes back to an example of old stakeholder mapping, which is, okay, I'm working on this problem, or I'm working on this story idea. Where could potential collaboration partners come from? And then identifying them early and ensuring that that you've got permission to go out and do that. No one writes the plan specifically for you. You need to create that. And I think in some ways, it goes back to the relationship point that we talked about earlier, is not be afraid to pick up the phone and to meet people, go out for a coffee, establish relationships across departments, across agencies. Because I think from that very early conversation, it's amazing the amount of connections that then get made. It's a real kind of spider's web of a network once you do get out from behind the desk.
And I certainly think that as technology becomes more central to the way information is transferred and moved around in the economy, I think for the communications professional, this is a piece of the ground that we can colonise in lots of ways, to be the leaders of the conversation, and getting out there, because a lot of communications people have that personality where they like to have a conversation, they like to go and meet people, but I think it's something that communications can really bring enormous value to their organisations by knowing a lot of people and by getting out there and having those conversations.
Yeah, it's so true. I think, I've seen a great example, actually Virginia Cook at the department, who's brought together, helped actually bring together the group of agencies underneath that department to communicate and share information. That's a really great way of, a leadership role actually creating a structure. But it's those informal catch-ups and conversations, I think, that are equally as important. And my only concern about technology, David, is I think, sometimes there's an over-reliance on, I sent an email,
That's right.
therefore the relationship's built. And we all know that that's just not how it works. And in some ways, when we talked about that cut-through, we face that every day in the way that we receive communication. It's the person that picks up the phone to me that will get the most attention, because it's so unusual for people to call to just chat through an idea, or what do you think, or that I will always take those phone calls because they're such rare opportunities, and I'd love them not to be like that. I'd actually love all my communicators to be on the phone all the time.
So listen, just returning to this challenge of the attention economy, and you mentioned this notion of content and the ability to create and distribute content, the abundance of content, but by grounding your stories and the content that you're creating in that clear purpose, with that understanding of what the mission is around being relevant and accessible and appealing. How important is it for the stories that you're telling for the various areas of CSIRO that they be told consistently, that they turn up regularly, that there's a thread almost through those stories that are continuing to earn a share, I suppose, of people's most valuable asset, which is their time and their attention?
Yeah, it's so critical. I can't overestimate that. And I think when you're in an organisation where there's just lots of really interesting stuff, it's tempting that you just throw everything out there and see what sticks. But these days it's not enough just to have something really interesting to say. It has to be all intelligently linked and ordered together. I think sometimes when we look at social media, it all looks like a massive jumble, but you can see the organisations that have a really well thought through content strategy. Now, as a consumer, you probably don't see that necessarily, but the net result is, you become much more loyal to that organisation. You're more likely to follow and share. You're much more likely to have a deeper engagement. And as we know, with changes to things like the Facebook algorithms, that is so critical for organisations that aren't going to be, throwing a lot of money behind spends or profiles. Having a really strong, clear content strategy, clear themes, a consistent tone of voice, but something that still enables you to have a bit of fun where you need to, or to really cut through in your messages is critical. And I think you touched on that consistency piece. Everyone is so concerned about trust. We talk about trust falling, and we know in the last year we've been particularly challenged around trust. But the key to trust is people knowing who you are and what you do and what you stand for, and turning up consistently. Now, if you keep turning up as something different every time they see you, you've got no chance about building and maintaining trust. So I think, I would encourage no one to underestimate the importance of a very clear, very purposeful content strategy that's, that's extremely well aligned, and so much so that where I've put content and content strategy is probably one of my biggest priorities this year, this coming year, from a communications perspective for the CSIRO. Because we have to ensure that we're showing up consistently, and that people can see what we are trying to deliver for the country.
And in terms of that, the distribution challenge, so if we say we've got the story straight, we've got it grounded in our mission, we understand our purpose, we've now got that rhythm that our strategy enables us and gives us that certainty and clarity about what's coming up. How do people make judgments about whether it's a story to be told online or a story to be told offline, or how in fact you will tell a particular story using a mix of both? What's your advice around trying to understand how do you bring those two together to make a powerful impact?
Oh, that's such a great question, and one that I think we grapple with all the time. Look, I think one thing's for sure is that gone are the days where you get to pick one story and put it out everywhere, because it just doesn't get the cut through that you need. So whether it's a story that it used to be that you everyone would feel like they could tick the box if it went out in a press release and it was tweeted and it went up on Facebook and LinkedIn, and you felt like you had a really good integrated strategy. But the reality is that half of that stuff just doesn't stick. I think you do have to look at each channel and really understand your audience and understand that some content is better on one channel than another. I certainly know that we've been looking at growing Instagram and our engagement in Instagram, and by no means do we have huge numbers of audiences, but I think the team has really understood what formula works and what stories work for Instagram and what doesn't. And part of it is about allowing your communications teams to experiment a little. Let them try out things. Your audience will tell you quite quickly when something doesn't work or not, and it's not the end of the world if it doesn't. It's actually use it as information to learn and start shaping and building your strategy. And every time you make a mistake or you have a huge success, it's information that helps. It's kind of grist for the wheels. It helps you work out how to shape your strategy. And then every now and then, try something really out of the box. Try a different kind of engagement, maybe try a different medium, potentially look at a different way of shaping a message, so that you can, again, test to see if it enables you to get better traction. And I think the other piece is, we all have content guidelines and community guidelines that we create to give us that consistency. And while I am certainly a champion for consistency, I'm also a great supporter in that, we've got great, bright people who are working in our teams who, know the audiences really well, is give them a little bit of freedom and flexibility to try some stuff.
And how in terms of that experimentation, because the Mary Meeker report that comes out annually was out again this week, which is all about the internet and the growth of the internet and the impact of the internet. And some of the statistics that sort of caught my eye is obviously the importance of mobile now. The numbers are massive, but the growth in connectivity, the speed of connectivity, and really the power now of video and the preference for video. How are you getting on top of the gorilla that is video and making it relevant to your audiences and being able to keep up the supply of video to your audiences?
Yeah, I think we're still grappling with it, in all honesty. I think that with the production of video, where we've come from is that it needs to be a really polished, really slick, piece of footage, and I think that what you've just described and our audiences are telling us they just don't have time for that, and we don't have time for that anymore. So where we're going is we're picking key pieces of research, for example, that we need to have really good in-depth explanations on. So particularly for science, areas that are quite complex, investing the time in developing those pieces of content, but also I think increasingly we're going to need to adapt that strategy to capture more, more real or more in the moment time. So, I think, one of these challenges that we talked about the CSIRO being relevant, accessible and appealing, or anyone being relevant, accessible, appealing is about almost letting people into sort of the behind the scenes. So for the scientists, people have this view of scientists being, people in white coats and it all being very secret. I think video is going to give us that opportunity, and in probably a much less highly produced way, to capture the work that our scientists are doing at their benchtops and in the field, and turn around those videos, get them out very quickly. And that's certainly something that we're grappling with right now.
Well, I don't think you're alone on that one. I think we're all trying to understand what is the secret sauce, and it's all part of this wonderful time that we're in at the moment. I think that where you mentioned that word before around experimentation. I think we're all going to be experimenting, but as soon as we sort of drop on something that we think is going to be a winner, something 5G will come along, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, that's so last week, we're now going to have to do something else. So that's exactly right. That agile mentality is really going to have to be baked into communications teams to understand that, you're really going to have to do it. Now, listen, you've been very generous with your time, but no one gets away without a question about measurement. How are you going with the big challenge around, being able to demonstrate to the senior executives that the money that they're investing with you to support the business of CSIRO is well spent?
Yeah, good question. And I think measurement is so critical to demonstrating the success, because, even in great times where you're getting a lot of media coverage and you feel like your channels are growing, you always need the evidence to support you. So we actually look at lead and lag measures. So lead measures looking at obviously measuring our social media audience reach, engagement. We look at dwell times to websites, views on blogs. So we have some general measures, but then we also have quite specific ones. So we're running a campaign, we want to know. So for example, we're running a new campaign, which is a business to business campaign through some of the domestic airport lounges, and we want to see there's a very specific call to action. So we will measure how effective that call to action is, or how effective that campaign is, and that will help us, work out whether it's something that we would try again or not. So we have those lead measures around, things that you can instantly get a gauge for, and then every year we run a sentiment survey. So our Australian taxpayers fund the CSIRO largely, so we find out what they think about us. And so we use an external organisation, and they measure, largely around trust, awareness and perceptions. We do that every year. We also do that with a business audience as well, which is fairly new. We introduced that, I think, in the last 3 years. And that gives us a good yardstick. Now, it's not perfect, because as we know, something like trust is not just about, it's not just something that you can directly impact. You can't say, well, I want people to trust me more, so I'm going to run this campaign or that campaign. It's a whole range of factors, not least actually people seeing you showing up, that they can start to form an opinion of you. But it's also influenced by a lot of external factors. So it's not perfect, but I think regardless of that, it's still important to keep measuring, because you get that really valuable trend analysis over time, and you can start to see where the communications interventions that you ran had a difference and where they didn't. So we do measure those. We report them on a very regular basis. So the sentiment surveys happen annually, and then the metrics are tracked on a monthly basis, and they go into a tracking report that I share with the executive team and the CSIRO leadership team, of which I'm a part of, on a monthly basis. So they've got complete transparency and visibility into what works and what doesn't.
And how are you going?
Good. The challenge for the CSIRO is that we have very high awareness, so it's sort of 90% awareness. People like us.
It's one of the top 3 most trusted brands in Australia.
It is. Yeah. In terms of iconic brands, so the Red Cross, the Bureau of Meteorology, CSIRO. and we kind of bounce around. The Red Cross always seems to maintain the most trusted position, not surprisingly. I think the challenge for us is that people like us and they know us, but they don't really can't really describe really well what we do. And that's a broad, because I think in some demographics they know very well what we do. But generally, what I would like is that the Australian population knows why we're here, and they know the impact, and they know us beyond the big things, beyond, I kind of call them the sugar hits, beyond Wi-Fi, beyond the total wellbeing diet, beyond polymer banknotes, that they know what we're doing today to solve Australia's challenges today, like food security, like creating future industries, like having sustainable energy and resources. They know the challenges that we're working on today. So I think, yes, we're going well, but that we could do more. And for me, it's in that area of awareness and more understanding, and content's absolutely key to that.
Well, congratulations with all your success, and thank you very much for your service, because I think this is one of the great things about working in the public sector, is that you must feel a real sense of purpose around your work, that there is a real community impact. And when you put your head on your pillow, whichever capital city it is that you may be in, or rural part of Australia, whichever day of the week it is, because I know you have a very busy job where you travel a lot, you must go to sleep with a lot of sense of satisfaction.
I do. I'm sure everyone says they've got the best job in Australia. I think I've got the best job in Australia, if not the world. I'm in awe of the work that is delivered, and I'm in awe of the scientists and how humble they are. They are so humble about the work that they're doing, and it's the communicator's job to try and get those messages out there and ensure that everyone really understands the impact that they're making. But yeah, I sleep pretty soundly.
Very good. Okay, Tanya, well, thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time today, and I know the audience really does appreciate it, and there is so much wisdom. And thank you for sharing it with us today. And I know the purpose of the podcast is really for people to be able to take away a few gold nuggets, and I've got a page and a half worth of notes here, which I'm going to take away some thoughts that, okay, I hadn't thought about that in that particular way. So I'm going to integrate that. So thank you personally from me for teaching me some things here today. And thanks to you, the audience, for coming back once again. What a great conversation with a talented communicator who is doing such great things in the interests of not just Australia, but around the world, solving some of those bigger problems. It must be a great job, and she is doing a superb job there at the CSIRO. So thanks to you, and thanks to Tanya. And that's it for this week, but I'll be back at the same time in 2 weeks' time. But for the moment, it's bye for now.
You've been listening to the GovComms podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate and subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes.